Hello all, welcome to Paper Resource Geography, and today we are going to study something which is so very relevant. I am Dr. Seema Mehra Parihar, who has been teaching resource geography for last 30 years, has got PhD on natural resource management in Bhagirathi Basin, has also a postdoc from ITC Netherlands, and here we begin with United Nations policy models for resource management, way to sustainability. And today we are going to learn new things. As we all are so much conversant with the models, today we are going to also further discuss the role of models in resource management at a global level. We are also going to critically analyze the UN policies for resource management, and also after studying this chapter, you will be able to explain the political ecological linkages of resource management, which is something so very important. And at the same time, you'll also be able to understand the relevance of sustainability and the role of United Nations in taking care of the sustainable development goals. Now, the key words that we are going to talk about today are models, management, conflicts, political ecology, and sustainability. Let us start our lesson today and revisiting the role of model in resource management. Of course, I know that you all studied the models even in a chapter on model, but again, let's recapitulate. Model is an abstraction of reality. It is formal description of any system of interest. Models are simplified version that helps us to understand what if question. Models have its role in both natural science study and also for the study of various man-intervened anthropological issues like that of political and social structures. So very important. And also at the same time, models are tools to elucidate our understanding of the processes and the concepts involved in phenomenon. Again, so very important. And that's something which again we cannot forget in their relevance. And natural resource management models address several hypothetical problems. The management context and objectives of the model address the problems of natural resource management, and at the same time also gives an opportunity to explore the possibilities of the potential areas in natural resources management. That means all those neutral stuff which can be transformed as we study the Zimmermann model. Various computer models are also there, and if you just revisit your computer-based models which we have studied, and some of these models, as we realize, are also so very important that they can be applied ditto in the conditions. And one of them is in the wild management context. In the context of the United Nations, the central activity in wildlife management is, of course, habitat improvement and the major cause of decline in wildlife population. You know, the extinction is taking place. And to study the changing patterns of the land use have fragmented the habitat of many animal species. The general objective of the wildlife management is to simulate the effect of different habitat management and land use decisions on population dynamics. That means we are simulating. Specific objectives are to assess the impact on the wildlife management, and that's something which is so very important. Just remember, if you remember your modeling, what do you know it? You just know it. One is RA, one is RM, and one is RD. That is resource appraisal. That's the first step of the wildlife situation. Second is the resource management, that is protecting the cover in the spatial areas. And third is the development. That means we are also, studying about the habitat fragmentation of the area and how to take it forward. And the second areas in which we have models are the fisheries management. The central activity in the fisheries management is the process is to increase sustainable yield. If you remember your MSY index, that is maximum sustainable yield index, that's something so very important in the context of the fisheries. If we go beyond that, then that means fisheries cannot reproduce and we cannot take it forward. So it's so very important to have models, and that too for different oceans, as the harvesting and all that for different oceans is so very different. And we have to take care of the fishing efforts also. Ocean fishery and the bay fishery are two different. We create models for that. And the third in this line is the rangeland management. What is this? The rangeland management is to simulate forest production in rangeland ecosystem under different cattle stocking densities and frequencies of brush controls. And in this case, the specific objectives are to identify a combination of stocking densities, again resource appraisal, and to take a stock of the frequencies of the burning that result in sustainable forest production. And second, to evaluate the influence, that means we are doing analysis, evaluate the influence of the month of burning on the effectiveness of the brush control. And similarly on this floor is the forest management. The forest model helps to simulate the effect of different harvesting strategies on the sustainability of production and the abundance of wildlife. That means we are taking a resource appraisal of the wildlife and also of the trees, flora and fauna, and we examine the manner in which, number one, the length of the cutting the cycle takes place, the size and the spatial pattern. That's so very important. Next in the line is geospatial models. It's something which is so very important in today's world. It's capable of overlaying data sets to identify links, and this GIS software plays an important role in the branch of geography for analysis and data generation, thereby helps in formulating different models for the problem-specified solutions. Models based on GIS have been useful in designing several conservation programs like that of the forest resource management. By that, we all know it. Now, in case if you just revisit the GIS or the geospatial management, you know it. What does this geospatial informatics do? We also have so much data today from remote sensing. Remote sensing is sensing something from the distance, and that too of OAP, object area and phenomena, and we get a clear picture of that. That means nobody can lie about what is where and when. GIS, on the other hand, is simply, if you remember your GIS lessons, is CSTART. You capture spatial data and the non-spatial data. You transform this data, you analyze this data, you display this data, and you further works on lot of modeling techniques, and GIS helps us in doing that. So geospatial is going to create layers of anything that you've learned and can create models which can give us something, data to take care, and also can predict the future, which is so very important. So in other words, we can say that models are very important. And United Nations realized that. So let's now talk about UNDP Bureau for Policy and Program Support, and they develop all the programs relevant for UNDP. That is, what is UNDP? United Nations Development Program. And this UNDP provides technical support and also represents UNDP at various platforms and facilitates dialogues between civil society, corporate and government actors. That means United Nations encourages engagement in various thematic projects, and natural resources carry one of the most important place there. To see that the issue of risk is fully integrated into the UNDP project is also the responsibility of BPPS. Now this bureau helps the member countries to be more cooperative, and it tries to establish the roots of sustainable development policies and in the countries. That means this is across boundaries. That means it is borderless. It helps countries irrespective where they are located. And for this, it recommends different pathways, and the larger pathways are as following. Let's follow the pathway. Number one, it focuses on biodiversity and ecosystem. And we know for biodiversity and ecosystem, what is so critical? Nature is critical to our own well-being. And a sustainable future and provides the ecosystem services that underpin development and sustain our lives, including, name them. Yes, what does it help? Of course, oh yes, you're right. Water, clean air, fertile soil, food you cannot live without, medicine, and spiritual and cultural wealth. At the same time, we also need healthy ecosystem. They also help to buffer the adverse impacts of climate change, which is happening in rampant and natural disasters, from which the world's marginalized communities suffer disproportionately. Please remember, the marginalized communities are the ones who become more vulnerable. Isn't it sad? But United Nations is attempting to take care of that. And these services are particularly critically for many of the further add-on women and men living in vulnerable to poverty, who directly rely on natural resources for their livelihoods. They don't have enough money. They have to rely on the natural resources. Somebody has to preserve it. And sustaining these ecosystem services, United Nations relies are very important. And biodiversity represents an essential pillar of the world's effort to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals and the SDGs. And smart investment and effective management of natural resources, we all realize, contribute directly to all of the SDGs. And the BBPS Sustainable Development Cluster oversees the work of the Global Environmental Finance Unit and Environment and Natural Capital team, which further decides and further represents that so important to take care of the natural resources. And if you realize that so much million of the US dollars are being spent on this. But the question is it reaching the poor of the poor? And this work is aligned with UNDP's strategic plan and corporate strategies of ecosystems and biodiversities, ocean and water governance, climate change and energy programs. That means, you find that it's postulated so correctly. Next on the line now, the programs related to extractive industries. Which are they? Non-renewable natural resources such as metals, minerals, oil and gas. They also contribute to sustainable development. And in numerous ways, including by generating revenues that governments can, invest in the development and by catalyzing economic further development. And even, you can say that it also adds on to the job creation, which we all realize is so very important for a region to sustain and develop. However, many countries are unable to fully realize the benefits from their natural wealth. And UNDP supports the countries to reduce the environmental risk to resource extraction and helps the state to have an integrated, sustainable oriented model for resource extraction. That's what the UNDP report says. So that means the countries who are not clear on how to take care of that, like Africa and many nations, UNDP help you in that. And so we have a number of UN policies and the resource management, for resource management specific policies. And the NRM Working Framework, let's just try to look at what is it. And this generally contribute towards the resource management program. And it also address the sustainability issue if the power in the working of the body is decentralized among various stakeholders. So who are these various stakeholders? Different states, different people, if you go to the local level. And for this, a government that is not corrupt, that which works for the interest of the people, lesser bureaucratization of the government agencies. And at the same time, driver is the civil society that acts, and checks and balances to if anybody is doing something wrong. What you find that in such situations, and somewhere along the line, you also get government cooperation, then only a scheme becomes successful. Further, what we realize that, we also have something called resource interest groups. Now, who are these resource interest groups? If they play their role well, you can definitely, see to it that this place is the one that flourishes. As we were discussing, that the third party also sometimes is important in case if we have decentralized the power structures. But what we actually need to see to it, the third party is actually neutral. And many a times, like, World Bank has also done that. But we have to see to it that it's neutral and not driven by any individual interest. And sometimes, like you also come across the negotiations and cooperation for settling multiple disputes. Why do you need an external intervention? Let it be United Nations. You only need because you ultimately want these natural resources to be transformed and ultimately create jobs also for the people. Like even the tribal people, though they have indigenous means of production, they would also not mind in case if somebody helps and somebody see to it that the region is industrialized, developed, and they get a benefit for it. But it's actually a major challenge. It's not so easy. Because somewhere along the line, some people, when in case you have the models and all that, there are various organs and they claim to think that the moment they try to help, the economic structures gets reoriented, and these economic structures create more resource-based sustainable development models, ultimately they need to do, which can be more resilient to the development and to multiple conflicts which arise. While an economy that perpetuates resource concentration in a particular area, we have to see to it that they are just not there in the hand of the elites, simple few elites, the rich people, and who create unlimited access to non-renewable energy sources. And the experience is that you ultimately come across to with a few benefits, and you have ultimately a negative growth rate, as UNDGM report says. So that means ultimately our intention should be correct, in case if we want that ultimate model to be put in the right place. So it's worth noting that the natural resource and its management never is the sole issue for conflicts among the countries. But adding to the crisis in this whole scenario is something else. That means conflict is not resource based actually. Conflict is because the programs, the ones which are there, they are also related, you have political structures, social structures, economic structures, and these surface through such management processes, and they ultimately result in serious conflicts between different stakeholders, and that is so sad. Because, various UN-based research work are today coming out, and we are reading also, and you also, all the ones who are listening to this lecture also must be doing that. But if you look at it closely, you find that there are matter of resource disputes from socio-political framework. And the key policy frameworks at the world level are many. I'll give you some examples. Say the 2005 Security Council resolution highlights, that there are need to adopt a strategy of conflict that should address the root cause of conflicts. That means we should address the root cause of conflict. And this program or approach has been successful in African countries, where the root cause one is found that is not generally related with the resources, it is something else. And the resolution proclaims that the Security Council's determination to take action against the illegal exploitation and trafficking of natural resources. That means illegal exploitation and trafficking, please note that. These natural resources and high value commodities in areas where it contributes to the outbreak escalation or continuation of armed conflicts. That means it's something like, illegal things which are happening, intention was different, that creates a conflict. And the 2007 statement also, let's see to it, of the President of the Security Council on Natural Resources and Conflicts. Let's note down this statement. This statement says that the exploitation, trafficking and illicit trade of natural resources have played a role in contributing to the outbreak, escalation or continuation of armed conflict. So that means it's something other than that. The root cause is illegal trafficking. And in the situations of conflicts, it talks of, and that's something which is so good. Listen carefully. Talks of empowering the local governments with more means to handle the disputes in a peaceful manner. Isn't wonderful? And so that in these two statements which I just mentioned, 2005 and 7. Now let's look at 2009 statement, where the United Nations Secretary General's landmark report, Peace Building in the Immediate Aftermath of Conflict, outlined 5 recurring areas where, you'll find that international assistance is frequently requested as a peace building priority. And you'll be surprised that it's all directly related to natural resources. Number 1, safety and security, political processes, basic services, core government functions, and economic revitalization. The moment you start going further deeper into that, you will realize that this UNGA, United Nations General Assembly 2009 report, which clearly talks about that what is something which is so very important in this case is how you all manage natural resources. And NRM, what we call natural resource management, is a cross-cutting theme related to these various areas, increasing attention need to be paid to the available resources. We need to find about the relative locations, absolute locations, quality, and we need to work on their management principles and see to it all those models and the theories which we've learned today and all these basic services, are they taken care of or not? And what I mean by this, what are your basic needs? Water sanitation, waste management, all these are the ones which also indirectly provide fiscal revenues and strengthen the rule of law. And so that's something which has been addressed, reiterated again and again in this report by Secretary General, that ultimately, in case if we want the peace building to actually happen after any conflict for that matter, what is very important in this case is natural resource management of a region. How are you doing it? And so now coming forward, the 2010, there was a follow-up report, and that came into being that the states that natural resources, and it directly talks about the natural resources. The natural resources are the area of increasing concern where great efforts will be needed to deliver a more effective UN response. I would like to underline this. That is, that the great efforts will be needed. Please note down this in your copies. That United Nations report of 2010, that means 7 years back, noted in the multiple documents that the great efforts will be needed to deliver a more effective UN response to existing natural resources. It asks member states and the United Nations system to make questions of natural resource allocation, ownership, and access an integral part of peace building strategies. That means ownership and access. So you have to remember O and A, ownership and access. It should be there to almost as many people as possible. Next year, in 2011, the review of civilian capacities in the aftermath of conflict by an independent senior advisory group reporting to Secretary General in United Nations proposed a cluster system to clarify who delivers what kind of responses. That means who is a party, who is a stakeholder. It should be very clear. And those frequently requested areas again should be delivered by those all stakeholders. And natural resource management is subgrouped. Imagine, after realizing this, natural resource management is subgrouped with various economic development programs and agencies of United Nations. So that means after 2011, finally in 2011, the World Bank's development report on conflict, security, and development argued that to break cycles of violence and escape fragility, low-income, fragile, and conflicted area countries need to focus on restoring confidence and transforming institutions that provide citizen security, justice, and jobs. And this can be done through natural resource management, appropriate natural resource management. And that means 2011, like this is being effortlessly taught. The effort at international level to address such issues have to be brought through. They've also given ways, United Nations, through integration of political reform at the government level with the international norms on development. Underline international norms on development. And several programs are underway in United Nations that link resources with several priority sectors that affects the livelihood of several people across the globe, and more so for all those vulnerable groups. As suggested by United Nations, let's try to note down few programs which are there at present there. Number one, in the field of safety and security, United Nations system has developed integrated disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration standards. IDDRS notes that. And there is reference also in the same context to the importance of natural resources and land tenure in the revised edition of the IDDRS. So see how important are natural resources. even for bringing peace to the region. In the module 4.30 of IDDRS on socio-economic reintegration talks about the conflicting land resource management concerns which need to be addressed. And UNDP have established a joint initiative to further identify the linkages between DDR and natural resources in order to increase understanding of the risks and opportunities posed by natural resources. See, I mean, you're thinking of the grassroots, you're thinking of the situation that's there, and that's something which is so very important. That there is a new IDDRS module on DDR and natural resources, and that's forthcoming. That's again talking and realizing the relevance and importance of natural resources. Second in this is the United Nations policy for post-conflict employment creation, income generation, and reintegration. And this highlights the importance of natural resource management in its aim to do what? To scale up and maximize the impact. And it also talks about coherence and efficiency of employment support, which will come from the resources in the surrounding region. It also highlights the challenges that root causes of conflict, such as inequitable access to natural resources present, and offers recommendations which are there for addressing such challenges. And that's something which is so very important, because ultimately what all we need, ultimately the report realizes that job creation is something that will not only impact or have short-term and more sustainable long-term benefits, but definitely it will make that region flourish. And similar to that, there are multiple reintegration programs suggested. And so this is something that after these two, another example which I like, the pathway, is the Secretary General 2009 report on climate change and its possible security implications, identified 5 ways and through which climate changes, could potentially affect security. The last 3 of which are there involve natural resources. Of these 5, the last 3 are the ones which are, involve natural resources. And also at the same time, the Security Council has also expressed their concern towards it and also talked about the adverse effects of climate change that may, in the long run, aggravate, certain existing threats. Threats towards what? Threats towards everything, and make a region much more vulnerable. And this may also impact the peace and security of the region. In July 2011, it requested the Secretary General to report to the Council that when the security implications of climate change contribute to conflict or threatens peace, and that's something, which is in case if you want to absolve that, because at the grassroots level, what you ultimately find or what you ultimately want, you want at a larger level of the peace. The voluntary guidelines on the responsible governance of tenure of land, fisheries and forests in the context of national food security guidelines which are there are another things, which are further clearly prepared and are advised through different intergovernmental negotiations held at Food and Agriculture Organization. So, time and again what you find, the United Nations models are there and followed by many countries, and also these have been prepared by multiple committees of different regions and different stakeholders, like the World Food Security Committee and the voluntary, they have prepared guidelines on an inclusive consultation processes which are required in case if there are bilateral trading which is taking place in case related to different resources. Then, at the same time you find that a lot of issues are also directly linked with the agricultural development programs guided by the World Bank, which again have been strategized and the models prepared by United Nations, and those models which are there, they're acting, at the international level as instruments and are helping to improve the governance of tenure. The quality of governance of tenure is a fundamental factor in the success or failure across a range of critical efforts. And these critical efforts which are there and which are creating or providing benefits are to improve, number one, gender equity in access, manage tenure related disputes and conflicts, and also at the same time, we find it's providing access to land and shelter. And this is something, which is following different conflicts of different order. And further, United Nations interventions are also facilitating land reforms. They also are at the same time recognizing and implementing indigenous customary and community rights and are encouraging them, and also at the same time improving land administration and management services. So what we need is that these guidelines which are prepared by United Nations are like, practical guidance input which a region can follow or different government authorities can follow. Even the private sector, civil society and citizens can follow to improve the standards of everything, their living, governance of tenure and so on and so forth. And if we go further, the Secretary General report on women's participation, if we look at it, is also something which is so very critical. And the role women play in bringing peace to a region, in absolving all those conflicts, is created by utilizing their capacities. And these capacities, how can they be used in case if they are effective and equitable? The report further notes, it is to be highlighted again, that this report notes of women's equal access and ownership over productive land in large part due to their contributions in ensuring family and community food security and the relationship between food insecurity and the conflicts. The role of women is so important and so very correctly highlighted. The report definitely and intentionally calls for, number one, women's inclusion in every conflict mediation structures, women to participate in land management bodies, number three, women to be supported, please note, women to be supported in maintaining their rights over their natural resources. And we know it so very often in India, we know that women are the ones who are, taking or carrying fuel wood on their heads for such long distances. And also provision of legal services to be provided to women in case if they are required. Let us now also take to another side where the United Nations guiding principles on business and human rights. And in case if you look at it, and they are the ones which again have authoritative global standards on the respective roles of businesses and the governments in helping ensuring that companies respect human rights in their own operations and through that their businesses. And that's something which is so very important because ultimately we all have to treat everybody as an equal. And in the context of natural resource management, please note that the principles assure that the business is not done at the cost of human rights. And this set of principles also has the potentiality to protect the control of indigenous population over their resources. That means indigenous people, the ones who have worked so long and they have their own, somebody is using their own methodologies, and that may not be absolving. And this is something that is so well written, HRC 1731 in 2011 report. And so what I mean till now is that what you have learned or what you have seen, what have you seen? You've seen that United Nations is there and encouraging the use of natural resources in the optimum way, and ultimately with a key requirement for sustainability. Let's now take this forward and the United Nations, what they have to say about sustainability. So in case, of course, if you remember your optimistic and pessimistic models chapter, by now you all know that sustainability of a region is very important. And United Nations recognizes that. United Nations recognizes not only through that, but you may find that 2015, United Nations also has come with Sustainable Development Goals. And for them, sustainability is an approach of understanding ecological relationships that integrate society, economy, and environment. So it's C, society on one hand, economy and environment. It works on the principle of maintaining and utilization of resources in a way that does not compromise, please note down, that does not compromise the need of future generations. And this is something which is so very important. The 1987 definition of the United Nations World Commission on Environment and Development, if we revisit that WECD definitions, it explains sustainability as follows. Sustainability is that development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own demands. So that means present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own demands. As United Nations reported, sustainable development requires the promotion of values. And which are these values? Promotion of values that encourage consumption standards, that are within the bounds of the ecological possible arrangement, and to which all can reasonably aspire. Meeting essential needs depends in part of achieving full growth potential. That means the operationalizing full growth potential, and sustainable development clearly requires economic growth in places where, if you understand correctly, such needs are not being met. Though the issue is not merely one of population size, I think we've understood that. It's much more than that of the population size. But the distribution of resources, that's important. Sustainable development can only be pursued. Sustainable development can only be pursued, please note, if demographic developments are in harmony with the changing productive potential of the ecosystem. And that's so important. Sustainable development must not endanger the natural systems that support life on Earth, the atmosphere, the waters, the soils, and living beings. So we have to keep that in mind. Growth has no set limits in terms of population or resource use, beyond which lies ecological, of course we all are seeing around the disaster, but ultimate limits there are. Sustainability is so important. Sustainable development, by now we understand, it requires that the rate of depletion of non-renewable resources should foreclose as few options as possible. As sustainable development requires the conservation of plant and animal species. I hope you understand that. Sustainable development requires that the adverse impact on the quality of air, water, and other natural elements are minimized so as to sustain the ecosystem's overall integrity. And that's so important. And OSEM and all that, you know, this thing, they all say that. So by now we have realized that sustainability is very much required, but still it is a vague concept that builds on the acknowledgement of limitation of resources and human needs with the possibility of improving human capacity and standard of living. and equal distribution of resources for present and future. Though looks utopian, but possible. United Nations realizes that. Sustainability, of course, is a dynamic concept. It requires flexibility of approach and demands willingness to modify our growth trajectories according to environmental challenges, and which are different for different regions. Human needs and wants are different for different regions. Technological advancements are possible different for different regions. And United Nations realize the importance of sustainability, and therefore they've come out with Agenda 2030. And Agenda 2030, if we have to remember on one hand is sustainability, second is it's a plan of action for 3 P's. 3 P's. People, that's you and me. Planet, our planet, and prosperity. So we have to remember people, planet, and prosperity to strengthen universal peace in large freedom, and recognize that eradicating poverty in all its form and dimensions, including extreme poverty, is the greatest global challenge and an indispensable requirement for sustainable development. And because of that, United Nations have come out with 17 sustainable development goals and 169 targets. So that means how many goals are there? 17 and 169 targets to realize the human rights of all and to achieve gender equality and empowerment of all women and girls. They are integrated and indivisible and balance the 3 dimensions of sustainable development. Agenda 2030 for sustainable development underlies a global commitment. You remember your 3 P's, people, planet, and prosperity, to achieve sustainable development goal in its 3 dimensions, and these 3 dimensions are ESG, economic, social, and environmental, in a balanced and integrated manner. Let's now talk about, let's visit these 17 goals. Goal 1, end poverty in all its forms everywhere. Goal 2, end hunger, achieve food security and improve nutrition and promote sustainable agriculture. Goal 3, ensure healthy lives and promote well-being for all ages. Goal 4, ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning, opportunity for all. Goal 5, achieve gender equality and empower all women and girls. Goal 6, if we revise, ensure availability and sustainable management of water and sanitation for all. Please note down, so important, Goal 6 for water resource. Goal 7, ensure access, affordable, reliable, sustainable and modern energy. That means goal for energy. Goal 8, promote sustained, inclusive and sustainable economic growth and productive employment and decent work for all. Again, you cannot do without resources. Goal 9, to build resilient infrastructure, promote inclusive and sustainable industrialization and foster innovations, again dependent on resources. Goal 10, reduce inequalities within among countries. Goal 11, make cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient and sustainable. Can you do without resources managing properly? Goal 12, ensure sustainable consumption and production patterns. Goal 13, take urgent actions to combat climate change and its impact. Goal 14, conserve, please note down this, conserve and sustainably use the oceans, seas and marine resources for sustainable development. Goal 15, protect, restore and promote sustainable use of terrestrial ecosystems. Sustainably manage forests, combat desertifications and halt and reverse land degradation and halt biodiversity loss. Goal 16, to promote peaceful and inclusive societies for sustainable development, providing access to justice for all and build effective accountability and inclusive institutions at all levels. And the last goal, 17, strengthen the means of implementation and revitalize the global partnership for sustainable development. And now what have you seen? You've seen that all these goals are talking about natural resources. And the target is which year? Yes, guess. I'm giving you 3 options. 2020, 2025, 2030. Yes, 2030. By 2030, we all have to join hands to overcome that. Say, for example, for the water, if you look at the goals, if you remember what I rattled off, for water alone, SDG Goal 1, Goal 2, Goal 3 and Goal 15 are directly related. So, to add to that are Goal 12 and 13 also. We all need to work on that. So, in case, and that means United Nations is very sensitive towards the natural resource management requirement. Let's just critically evaluate them. And for me, in case if we evaluate, we find that the ways in which resource management projects, unless and until they are taken care of, unless and until we all become equal partners to them, unless and until we realize that the government policies have to be people friendly, resource friendly, indigenous people also, and local stakeholders also, and not only targeting or helping only few elites, we simply cannot take the prosperity concern forward. We have to think of sustainable and equitable development. We have to think of local people. We have to take care of the local economies. We have to, please, मैं इसको देख के नहीं बोल रही, मैं जल्दी कर रही हूँ. We have to assess the overall context towards improving the priority areas, and that's something which is so very important. We have to establish if there is a dependence on natural resources. And higher the dependence of population on natural resources, more would be the vulnerability of the NRM projects to be faced with a conflict. So we have to map this vulnerability. There can be a delinking of the human dependence on the natural resources. Any policies to look away from the dialectics of relationship between human and nature would definitely sever the human concerns in case if they are more attached to the resources and they cannot do without it. Second, we need to understand the political economic linkages. And a good policy framework should look at the resource management project as extension of political economic matrix of the system. Certainly, of course, political economic matrix of the system. And such perspective, if we do not understand, would be the cause of conflict and should be included in the agenda for resource management. Natural resource and the control over them has the greatest potentiality to create power inequality and would also create a space for the monopoly exercise of the power of the few, which of course we don't want. We love this world called equal distribution, equitable. But at the various level of political power, several sorts of conflict arise, which may vary from being totally undemocratic to a community-based managerial resource management. So we are coming now to the community. Third, we need to understand the governance system and the capacities. Transition settings often provide unprecedented opportunities for transforming or building institutions anew, and I hope we all agree to that. And wherever natural resources are the assets, that country depends on the potential to reinforce good natural resource management governance through all sectors is paramount. At least they should. They do it or not is a question. Natural resource capacity building projects that target national, regional or international stakeholders are critical for enhancing overcapacity as well as governance system. So the overall capacity is linked with the practices. And these efforts should be based on a mapping of the key stakeholders and an analysis of their characteristics. And of course, to add on is their structures, their interests, their expectations, their potentials and deficiencies mechanism for information sharing motives, for collaboration, as well as the extent of their involvement and participation throughout. And as early as possible, we need to do that. Until we do that, there will be a problem. And that's something which is so very important. And we all need to definitely take care of all these things if we are thinking of United Nations framework in which we are taking the journey forward. I think now in this lesson what all we have done, we have definitely come to the conclusion that we need to respect United Nations. We need to respect them for something that they are helping the natural resources to develop. And certainly, before that, if you recognize, we all have understood that the model is an abstraction of reality. It's a formal description of any system of interest. And United Nations is trying its best to create models that will help countries, that will help different stakeholders across regions, especially for the vulnerable groups. And United Nations is actually adding their own frameworks which the countries are following. And I think so you all also would now definitely respect in case if you look at the policies. And all these frameworks which are created for the natural resource management, if you have read it closely and if you have followed me, you'll realize the United Nations framework is contributing towards resource management programs. And they're also addressing at the same time different sustainable issues. And the working of the body is decentralized among the various stakeholders. And for this, a government that is not corrupt, that which works for the interest of people, of course, the lesser bureaucratization of the government is there. And the need also is of the civil society that is in position. What is happening is that that region is flourishing. Natural resources are coming up and people are taking the path forward of development. And in case if we go with that, the 2030 agenda for United Nations driven sustainable development goals would definitely be achieved. And those 3 P's, if you remember, people, planet and prosperity could be achieved. And achieving this sustainable development goal in its 3 dimensions, economic, social and environmental, would not be far away and could be managed in an integrated manner. Therefore, the interlinkages will strengthen their cohesiveness and can be used as a filter to assess the completeness and robustness of the future goals and targets. But of course, what is required for this is simply that you and me and our neighbors, our countries, our governments, our people around us should also participate and should see to it that we all have our intentions correct. Then only any model, any policy can actually be implemented truthfully. And ultimately, we all want that. Happy learning resource management, and please preserve the resources. I always say that. Until you do that, you and me cannot definitely promise our future generations to have, even be able to hold them. All those stories would remain stories. So my friends, I would only like to tell you, please love the natural resources and also at the same time conserve them, preserve them, use them judiciously. You and me can definitely help United Nations in having these 230 sustainable goals at their best and to complete them. Thank you very much. Thank you.